The next morning, Dr. Ben Carter woke up with his mind already made up. He had spent most of the night listening to the sounds from beyond the barriers and thinking about what he had learned. The creatures out there were fascinating from a scientific point of view, and he knew that staying safe inside the city walls would teach him nothing useful. He found Commander Morrison in the dining area, eating something that looked like purple fruit but tasted like chicken. The Zalari had provided food that humans could eat, though it all looked strange and had unexpected flavors. "Jake, I want to request permission for a research expedition into the Forbidden Zones," Ben said without any greeting. Jake nearly choked on his food. "You want to do what?" "You heard me. We came here to learn about this world and its life forms. We can't do that from behind energy barriers. I want to go out there and observe these apex predators in their natural habitat." "Ben, did you listen to anything Kethvak told us yesterday? Those things out there are designed to kill intelligent beings. They're not just animals. They're nightmare creatures that have been perfected by millions of years of evolution." Ben sat down across from Jake and leaned forward. "Exactly my point. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to study predators that have evolved alongside intelligent prey. The scientific value is enormous. The dead scientist value is even bigger," Jake replied. "I'm not going to let you commit suicide in the name of research. I'm not talking about going alone. Small team, proper precautions, experienced guides. The Zalari must have some people who know the safe routes through the dangerous areas." Jake put down his strange breakfast and studied his old friend's face. He had known Ben for 15 years, and he recognized that look. Ben had made up his mind, and nothing was going to change it. "This is insane," Jake said finally. "Probably," Ben agreed. "But think about what we could learn. These creatures represent a completely different evolutionary path than anything on Earth. They could teach us things about predator behavior that we never imagined." Before Jake could respond, Ambassador Kethvak entered the dining area with several other Zalari. Their large eyes fixed on the two humans, and Jake had the uncomfortable feeling that they had been listening to the conversation. "Commander Morrison, Dr. Carter," Kethvak said in his wind-through-leaves voice. "We could not help but overhear your discussion. Surely you are not seriously considering venturing beyond our protective barriers." "Dr. Carter has requested permission for a research expedition," Jake said carefully. "I'm trying to talk him out of it." The Zalari made sounds that their translation devices couldn't convert, but the meaning was clear enough. They thought the idea was completely insane. "With great respect, Dr. Carter," Kethvak said, "what you propose is not research. It is suicide. The creatures beyond our barriers are not mere animals to be observed and catalogued. They are death given form and purpose." "I understand the risks," Ben replied calmly, "but I also understand the value of knowledge. Humanity has always learned by pushing boundaries and taking calculated risks. There is nothing calculated about walking into the domain of creatures that exist only to kill," said Kolmesh, the older Zalari. "In our recorded history, no expedition into the deep wild has ever returned intact. Most do not return at all." But Ben was not deterred. He spent the next hour presenting his case, explaining how humans had studied dangerous predators on Earth for centuries. He talked about Jane Goodall living among wild chimpanzees, about researchers tracking polar bears in the Arctic, about marine biologists swimming with great white sharks. "Your species has a very different relationship with danger than ours," Kethvak observed. "We have survived by learning to avoid threats. You seem to have survived by learning to confront them." "Different evolutionary paths," Ben agreed, "but both successful in their own way." The debate continued for most of the morning, with more Zalari joining the discussion as word spread through the city. The idea of deliberately seeking out the apex predators was so foreign to their thinking that many of them came just to hear the humans explain their reasoning. Finally, two young Zalari stepped forward. One was Vethsil, who had been their guide the day before. The other was introduced as Nimtar, a tracker who specialized in monitoring the movements of dangerous creatures from a safe distance. "We will guide you," Vethsil announced, causing a shocked silence among the other Zalari. You will do no such thing, Kethvak said sharply. I forbid it. With respect, Ambassador, you cannot forbid what we choose to do with our own lives, Nimtar replied. These humans have shown us something we had forgotten. There was a time when our ancestors also faced danger directly. Perhaps it is time we remembered those lessons. The argument that followed was intense, with the older Zalari insisting that the expedition was suicide, and the younger ones arguing that they had become too fearful, too dependent on their barriers and weapons. Finally, Kethvak held up his long arms for silence. Very well, he said. If you are determined to throw your lives away, I cannot stop you. But you will follow strict protocols. You will carry the strongest weapons we possess. You will maintain constant communication with the city, and you will return at the first sign of real danger. Agreed, Ben said immediately. I have not agreed to anything yet, Jake interrupted. Ben, this is still a terrible idea. Maybe, Ben admitted, but it's my terrible idea, and I'm going to follow through with it. The question is whether you're going to support your team or try to stop me. Jake looked around at the assembled Zalari, their large eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He thought about the mission directives from Earth Command, about the importance of learning everything they could about this new world and its inhabitants. And he thought about Ben, who had been his friend and colleague for more years than he cared to count. Damn it, Jake said finally. All right, but we do this properly. Full team, proper equipment, constant communication, and at the first sign that we're in over our heads, we retreat. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Understood, Ben agreed. The preparation took the rest of the day. The Zalari provided energy weapons that looked like crosses between rifles and lightning rods, along with portable barrier generators and emergency beacons. They also gave the humans protective suits made from some kind of flexible armor that could supposedly stop the claws of most smaller predators. Dr. Rachel Kim insisted on joining the expedition, arguing that they needed a xenobiologist to properly document whatever they found. Sergeant Martinez volunteered to provide security, though he made it clear that he thought they were all crazy. So let me get this straight, Tony said as he checked his borrowed energy weapon. We're going to walk into a forest full of monsters that have been specifically designed by evolution to kill intelligent beings, just so Ben can take notes on their behavior patterns. That's about the size of it, Ben replied cheerfully. And the local experts think this is the stupidest idea they've ever heard? Pretty much. Tony shook his head. Well, at least it won't be boring. As the sun set over the alien forest, the expedition made final preparations. The energy barriers around the city would be lowered for exactly 30 seconds to allow them to pass through, and then they would be on their own in the wilderness beyond. Kethvak came to see them off, along with most of the city's population. The Zalari watched the humans with expressions that their faces weren't quite designed to make, mixtures of admiration and disbelief, and something that might have been envy. You go where we fear to tread, Kethvak said to Ben. Perhaps you will learn something that we have forgotten in our long years of hiding behind barriers. Maybe, Ben replied. Or maybe we'll just get eaten by something with too many teeth. Either way, it should be educational. The barriers flickered and went down for their brief window. The expedition team walked through the gap and into the wild forest beyond, where the rules of civilization no longer applied. Behind them, the energy field snapped back into place, cutting them off from safety and forcing them to rely on their own skills and courage. The forest was darker than it had looked from inside the city. The massive trees blocked out most of the light from the alien sun, leaving them in a twilight world of shadows and strange sounds. The air was thick and humid, filled with scents that had no names and sounds that spoke of things moving in the darkness. Motion sensors are picking up movement all around us, Rachel reported, checking her instruments. Large creatures keeping their distance but definitely tracking our progress. Expected, said Nimtar, the Zalari tracker. The forest knows we are here. It is deciding what to do about us. They had been walking for less than an hour when Vethsil stopped suddenly, his antenna-like sensory organs twitching with alarm. Something follows, he whispered. Large. Patient. It has been matching our pace for several minutes. Ben felt his heart rate increase, but not with fear. This was what he had come for, the chance to observe apex predators in their natural environment. He checked his recording equipment to make sure everything was working properly. "Can you tell what kind of creature it is?" he asked. Nimtar closed his large eyes and seemed to be listening with senses that humans didn't possess. When he opened them again, his expression was grim. "Kethmori," he said. "Shadowstalker." The stars looked different from this far away from Earth. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the big window of his ship and watched the new world spinning below them. The planet was green and blue, with white clouds moving across its surface like cotton balls. After flying through space for 18 long months, they had finally found what they were looking for. The ship was called Celestial Dawn, and it was the best Earth had ever built. It was as long as 3 football fields and filled with the smartest people humanity could find. Jake had been chosen to lead this mission because he was good at making hard choices and keeping people safe. "Sir, something is happening," said Lisa Chang from her chair at the communications desk. Her fingers moved fast across the glowing buttons and screens in front of her. "I'm getting signals from the planet. Real signals, not just noise. Someone down there is trying to talk to us." Jake felt his heart beat faster. This was what they had come so far to find. Life that could think and build and talk back to them. He walked over to Lisa's station and looked at the strange patterns moving across her screen. "Are you sure it's not just some kind of natural signal?" he asked. "No, sir, this is definitely made by someone smart. The patterns repeat in ways that only happen when someone is trying to send a message. We did it. We found them." Within an hour, the alien signals had changed. They were getting stronger and more complex, like someone was figuring out how to talk to them better. Dr. Ben Carter came up to the bridge from his lab in the lower part of the ship. Ben was older than most of the crew, with gray hair and lines around his eyes from years of being outside in all kinds of weather. He used to be a soldier before he became a scientist. "They're learning fast," Ben said, looking at the data streaming across the screens. "Whatever these beings are, they're smart enough to figure out our communication methods in real time." Jake nodded. Ben was the kind of man who noticed things that others missed. If he said the aliens were smart, then they probably were very smart indeed. It took 3 more hours before they could actually understand each other. The aliens had built some kind of machine that could turn their thoughts into sounds that humans could understand. When the first clear message came through the speakers, everyone on the bridge went quiet. "Greetings, travelers from distant stars," the voice said. It sounded like wind moving through leaves, but the words were clear. "We are the Zolari. We have watched your metal bird arrive in our sky. You are welcome here, though we must speak of dangers." Jake stepped forward to the microphone. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the Earthship Celestial Dawn. We come in peace, seeking friendship and knowledge. We thank you for your welcome. You honor us with your words, Commander Morrison. I am Ambassador Kethvak, speaker for our people in matters of sky and stars. Your species appears strong and hardy, built for survival. This is good for our world. Tests all who walk upon it." Ben raised an eyebrow at Jake. The alien's words were polite, but they carried a warning that was hard to miss. "What kind of dangers are we talking about, Ambassador?" Jake asked. There was a pause before Kethvak answered. "Our world, which you may call as you wish, but we name Threshmole, is home to creatures that have been shaped by millions of years to be perfect killers. They hunt not just for food, but for the joy of the hunt itself. Even our greatest warriors fear to walk alone in the wild places." "We understand," Jake replied. "Earth has dangerous animals too. We've learned to live with them." Another pause, longer this time. When Kethvak spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been surprise. "Perhaps you have. Your people radiate something we have not felt from other sky travelers. Most who come from the stars bring fear scent with them, the smell of beings who have forgotten how to face death. You smell of confidence." Lisa looked at Jake with confusion. "Fear scent? What does that mean?" Dr. Carter was the one who answered. "Many animals can smell emotions through chemical signals. Adrenaline, stress hormones, pheromones. If the Zalari evolved alongside dangerous predators, they probably developed the ability to detect fear in others. And they're saying we don't smell afraid? Jake asked. More than that, Ben said, studying the communication logs. They're saying, we smell like predators ourselves. The conversation with Ambassador Kethvak continued for another hour. The Zalari were clearly a peaceful people who had survived on their dangerous world by being very careful and very smart. They built their cities with energy barriers and sonic weapons to keep the deadly creatures away. They traveled in large groups with heavy weapons when they had to go into the wild. They had turned avoiding danger into an art form. We would be honored to have you visit our world, Kethvak finally said. But we must insist that you understand the risks. In our recorded history, we have lost many explorers to the apex hunters. Even our most experienced guides sometimes do not return. These creatures are not mere animals. They are nightmares that learn to breathe. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. Lisa was excited, her eyes bright with the thrill of making first contact. Dr. Carter looked thoughtful, already planning what he wanted to study. The other officers were alert and ready, the way they always were when facing something new. We appreciate your concern, Ambassador, Jake said. But humanity didn't get to the stars by avoiding danger. We've faced our share of nightmares and we're still here. So we have observed, Kethvak replied, and there was something in his voice that might have been respect. Very well. We will prepare a place for your arrival. But please, bring your strongest weapons and your bravest warriors. You will need both. After the communication ended, Jake called his senior staff together in the conference room. The room was small but comfortable, with a big table in the middle and screens on all, the walls showing pictures of the planet below. What do you think? Jake asked the group. They're scared, said Dr. Rachel Kim, the team's expert on alien life. Whatever is down there has these people terrified, but they're also curious about us. The way they talked about how we smell different, how we don't carry fear scent like other space travelers. That's interesting. It suggests they've met other alien species before, Ben added. And those other species were afraid of what they found on this planet. We might be the first ones who aren't. Is that good or bad? Asked Lieutenant Amy Roberts, their best pilot. Depends on whether we're brave or just stupid, Ben said with a slight smile. Jake made his decision. We're going down. Small team. Standard first contact protocols. Ben, I want you on the team. Your experience with dangerous wildlife might come in handy. I was hoping you'd say that, Ben replied. I've been reading about Earth's evolutionary history during the trip. Humans are actually pretty unique in how we deal with predators. Most species either become prey or predator, but we became both. We learned to hunt and to avoid being hunted. That might give us an edge down there. Or it might get us killed, Lisa pointed out. Only one way to find out, Jake said. Amy, prep the shuttle. We're going to meet our new neighbors. As the crew prepared for their first visit to an alien world, none of them knew that they were about to challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about predator and prey. The Zalari were watching their preparations with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. These humans were either the bravest beings they had ever encountered or the most foolish. Time would tell which it was. 3 days later, the small shuttle dropped through the thick clouds toward the surface of the alien world. Lieutenant Amy Roberts sat at the controls, her hands steady on the flight stick as she guided them down through the strange atmosphere. The air outside was thick and green, filled with floating particles that made everything look like they were flying through soup. Landing zone coming up, Amy announced. The Zalari have cleared a space for us about 2 miles from their main city. Commander Jake Morrison sat behind her, looking out the window at the forest below. The trees were huge, bigger than the giant redwoods back on Earth, and they seemed to move even when there was no wind. Their leaves were dark purple and black, not green like Earth plants, and they grew so thick that hardly any light reached the ground. Dr. Ben Carter sat next to Jake, checking his equipment one more time. He had brought sample containers, recording devices, and basic camping gear, but no heavy weapons like the Zalari had suggested. Staff Sergeant Tony Martinez sat across from them, his hand resting on his sidearm. Tony was a good soldier, calm, and reliable, but even he looked nervous about what they might find down there. Dr. Rachel Kim was busy with her scanner, reading the air and soil composition as they descended. "The atmosphere is breathable," she reported. "Higher oxygen content than Earth, which might explain why everything grows so big down here. Gravity is about the same as home." The shuttle touched down with a soft bump in a clearing that had been burned out of the forest. The ground was black and still smoking in some places, showing how the Zalari had made room for them to land. As soon as the engines shut down, Jake could hear sounds from the forest around them. Strange calls and cries echoed between the massive trees, some high and sharp, others low and rumbling like distant thunder. "Sounds like a busy place," Tony said, his voice tight. The shuttle door opened with a hiss, and the humans got their first taste of alien air. It was thick and humid like breathing soup, and it tasted of things that had no names. Strange smells filled their noses, some sweet, some sharp, and some that made them want to step back into the shuttle. A group of Zalari was waiting at the edge of the clearing. They were tall and thin, much taller than humans, with long arms, and legs that looked like they could bend in too many places. Their skin was pale green and seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Their eyes were the most striking thing about them, huge and black with many small parts like a fly's eye, but much more intelligent. The leader stepped forward, moving with careful, measured steps. "Welcome to Thresh-Mole, friends from the stars. I am Ambassador Kethvak, and these are my advisors." He gestured to the other Zalari with one of his long, thin arms. "We are honored by your visit, though we confess to being concerned for your safety." Jake stepped forward and extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Kethvak looked at the offered hand for a moment, then carefully reached out with his own thin fingers to touch it briefly. The alien skin felt cool and dry, like touching a snake. "Thank you for having us, Ambassador," Jake said. "We're looking forward to learning about your world and your people." "As are we about yours," Kethvak replied. "But first we must escort you to safety. Even this cleared area is not secure for long. The forest watches, and the watchers are always hungry." The Zalari led them along a path that had been cut through the massive trees. The path was wide enough for several people to walk side by side, and Jake noticed that it was lined with strange metal posts that hummed with energy. Every few hundred feet there were small towers with spinning devices on top that made high-pitched sounds. "Sonic barriers," explained Vethsil, a younger Zalari who had been assigned as their guide. "They produce sounds that most predators find painful. The energy fields can deliver a shock strong enough to stop most creatures, though not the largest ones." Dr. Carter was looking around with great interest, noting how the Zalari had modified their environment to create safe passages. "How often do these barriers fail?" he asked. "More often than we would like," Vethsil admitted. "The hunters learn. They adapt. What works today may not work tomorrow." As they walked, the humans began to understand why the Zalari were so afraid of their own world. The forest around them was alive with movement and sound, but it was the wrong kind of life. Things moved in the shadows between the trees, keeping pace with the group but never coming close enough to be seen clearly. Red eyes gleamed in the darkness under the canopy, and strange calls echoed from all directions. "They're watching us," Rachel whispered to Ben. "Always," said Vethsil, who had heard her. "The forest has many eyes, and they all hunger for flesh. We have learned to accept being watched as the price of travel." The Zalari city of Threshahalan was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Instead of being built from stone or metal, it appeared to have been grown from the forest itself. The buildings rose from the ground like enormous trees, their walls made of some kind of living wood that pulsed with a soft inner light. Bridges made of woven branches connected the structures high above the ground, and the whole city seemed to breathe and move like a single living organism. "Impressive," Jake said, and he meant it. "How long did it take to grow all this?" "Grow is the correct word," Kethvak confirmed. "We do not build in the way you understand building. We shape and guide living things to serve our needs. This city has been growing for over 3,000 of your years." But what impressed the humans most was not the city itself, but the defenses around it. A wall of pure energy surrounded the entire settlement, crackling and sparking like lightning trapped in glass. Beyond the energy barrier, sonic emitters filled the air with sounds that made their teeth ache. And beyond that, the humans could see the shapes of automated weapons tracking back and forth, watching for any threat that might approach. "This is quite a fortress," Tony observed. "It has to be," said Kulmesh, an older Zalari who joined them as they entered the city. "Last season we lost 47 citizens to the Apex Hunters. The season before that, 62. The barriers help, but they are not perfect." The humans were led to a building near the center of the city, where they would stay during their visit. The rooms were comfortable, if strange, with furniture that seemed to have grown from the floor and walls that glowed with soft bioluminescent light. But Jake noticed that even here, in the heart of the city, there were no real windows. Instead, there were screens that showed views of the outside, as if the Zalari were afraid to have actual openings to the world beyond their barriers. That evening, Kethvak took them to the edge of the city to show them what they were up against. At the boundary of the settlement, where the energy barriers met the wild forest, he activated a series of holographic projectors that created three-dimensional images of the creatures that hunted in the darkness beyond. "These are the Shadow Stalkers," he said, showing them an image of a creature that looked like a cross between a large cat and a praying mantis, but made of living darkness. "The Kethmori, in our language. They can step partially out of your dimension, making them nearly impossible to hit with conventional weapons. They hunt by fear, paralyzing their prey with terror before closing in for the kill." The next image showed something even worse. It was humanoid in shape, but much taller, with arms that hung down to its knees and claws that looked like they could cut through steel. Its skin was black as space, and it seemed to absorb the light around it. "The Void Hunters," Kethvak continued. "Morgethel. They are death itself given form. A single mature Void Hunter has been known to destroy entire settlements. They possess intelligence equal to our own, but they use it only for killing." Dr. Carter studied the projections carefully, taking notes on his tablet. "Fascinating evolutionary development," he said. "Perfect ambush predators with apparent psychic abilities. How do you typically handle encounters with them?" "We don't," Kethvak replied simply. "When we must travel outside the barriers, we go in large groups with the heaviest weapons we can carry. Even then, success is never certain. A single Void Hunter killed 12 of our best warriors last month. The survivors spoke of a creature that seemed to know what they would do before they did it." The Zalari watched the humans' faces carefully, as they described these terrors, expecting to see the proper fear response. Instead, they saw something they didn't understand. The humans looked interested, even curious, but not afraid. Dr. Carter was asking technical questions about the creature's behavior patterns. Sergeant Martinez was evaluating their tactical capabilities like a soldier studying an enemy. Commander Morrison was thinking about how to deal with them, not how to avoid them. "You are not afraid," Vethsil observed, his voice filled with confusion. "Concerned, yes," Jake replied. "Afraid, no. Every world has its dangers. The key is learning how to handle them." "But these are not ordinary dangers," Kulmesh insisted. "These are apex predators that have evolved specifically to hunt intelligent beings. They are monsters from the deepest nightmares." Ben Carter looked up from his notes. "With respect, Ambassador, we've been dealing with monsters for our entire evolutionary history. Where we come from, everything is trying to eat everything else. We learned a long time ago that the best way to survive is not to hide from danger, but to..." The Shadow Stalker followed them for 2 hours before it decided to attack. During that time, the expedition moved through the alien forest like a small island of nervous energy surrounded by an ocean of watching darkness. Every few minutes, one of them would catch a glimpse of movement in their peripheral vision, but when they turned to look, there would be nothing there except shadows and the massive tree trunks. Dr. Ben Carter was in his element. He walked near the front of the group with his recording equipment running constantly, documenting everything he observed about their stalker's behavior. The creature was patient, intelligent, and methodical in a way that reminded him more of a human hunter than an animal predator. "It's learning our movement patterns," he said quietly to Dr. Rachel Kim, who was walking beside him with her own sensors. Watch how it adjusts its position every time we change direction. It's not just following us, it's predicting where we're going to go. Sergeant Tony Martinez kept his borrowed energy weapon ready, though he wasn't sure how much good it would do against something that could apparently step in and out of normal space. The Zalari guides, Vethsil and Nimtar, moved with obvious terror, their large eyes darting constantly between the shadows. "Why doesn't it attack?" Rachel whispered. "What's it waiting for?" "The perfect moment," Nimtar answered, his voice barely audible. Shadow stalkers are ambush predators. They study their prey until they understand every weakness, every escape route, every possible response. Only when they are certain of victory do they strike. "That's actually quite sophisticated," Ben observed, making notes on his tablet. "It suggests a level of tactical thinking that goes well beyond simple animal instinct." Vethsil looked at him with an expression that might have been disbelief. "You speak of it as if it were a fellow researcher, rather than a creature that wants to devour us." "In a way it is," Ben replied. "We're both trying to understand something new. The difference is that it wants to eat us afterward." The attack came when they reached a small clearing in the forest, a natural opening where some of the giant trees had fallen and created a space filled with filtered sunlight. It was exactly the kind of place where normal people would feel safer, with good visibility and multiple escape routes, but Nimtar recognized it immediately as a trap. "Stop," he whispered urgently. "Do not enter the clearing. This is a killing ground." But his warning came too late. The shadow stalker had been herding them toward this exact spot for the past hour, using their own instincts against them. As soon as they stepped into the open space, it materialized from the darkness at the edge of the clearing, like a nightmare given solid form. The creature was even more terrifying in full view than it had been as glimpses in the shadows. It stood, nearly 2 meters tall on powerful hind legs, with a body that seemed to be made of living darkness. Its front limbs were longer than its back legs, ending in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. Its head was elongated and predatory, with eyes that reflected light like black mirrors and a mouth full of teeth that seemed designed specifically for tearing apart intelligent prey. But the most disturbing thing about it was how it moved. The Shadowstalker didn't just walk or run. It flowed like liquid night, its form shifting and changing as parts of its body phased in and out of normal space. One moment it was solid and real. The next it was translucent and ghostly, impossible to target with conventional weapons. Vethsil screamed and immediately began firing his energy weapon, sending bolts of crackling electricity toward the creature. Most of the shots passed right through its phased form without effect. The few that connected seemed to cause it pain, but not enough to stop its advance. Nimtar was firing as well, his movements more controlled and precise, but even his accurate shots were having little effect on the creature's shifting form. The Shadow Stalker absorbed the attacks like they were minor annoyances, and continued moving toward the group with predatory grace. "Everyone stay calm," Ben called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "It's just another predator. They all have the same basic psychology." Tony looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Just another predator? That thing can teleport." "Not teleport," Ben corrected, slowly moving between the creature and the panicking Zalari. "Phase shifting. It's moving between dimensions, but it still has to follow the basic rules of physics when it's in our space." The Shadow Stalker paused in its advance, confused by this strange behavior. In its long experience hunting intelligent prey, victims either fled in terror or fought with desperate panic. This new creature was doing neither. Instead, it was moving deliberately toward the predator while maintaining what appeared to be a calm, analytical mindset. Ben began to circle the creature, slowly, keeping his movements smooth and non-threatening while maintaining steady eye contact. It was the same technique he had used with dangerous animals on Earth, a way of establishing dominance without triggering an immediate attack response. "Ben, what are you doing?" Rachel called out, her voice tight with fear. "Same thing I'd do, with a mountain lion or a grizzly bear back home," Ben replied without taking his eyes off the creature. "I'm making myself understood." The Shadow Stalker was experiencing something it had never felt before: uncertainty. This prey was not behaving according to any pattern in its genetic memory. More disturbing still, the creature's body language and scent were all wrong. Instead of the fear smell that should have been pouring off an intelligent being faced with imminent death, this strange creature radiated confidence and something that the predator's instincts recognized as dominance. Behavior. In my experience, Ben said conversationally, still circling the confused predator, apex predators are really just bullies. They rely on fear and intimidation to subdue their prey. Take that away, and they're just another animal trying to make a living. The shadow stalker tried to use its psychic fear-inducing abilities, sending waves of terror toward the human. But Ben had faced down charging elephants, territorial polar bears, and aggressive great whites. His mind had been hardened by years of dangerous encounters, and the alien's mental attacks felt like nothing more than a mild headache. That's an interesting trick, Ben noted, still maintaining his steady circling pattern. Psychic fear projection. But you're going to need something stronger than that to impress a species that evolved alongside saber-toothed cats and cave bears. The creature's confusion was turning to frustration. Nothing in its evolutionary history had prepared it for prey that refused to be intimidated. Worse, the human's confident movements and steady gaze were triggering responses in the predator's brain that it had never experienced before, responses that felt uncomfortably like submission. Tony had his weapon aimed at the creature, but he held his fire on Ben's subtle hand signal. The Zalari were watching in absolute shock as the human continued his strange dance with death, apparently unafraid of one of the most dangerous predators on their world. You know what your problem is? Ben said to the shadow stalker, his voice still calm and conversational. You've never met anything that wasn't afraid of you. You've become dependent on fear as a hunting tool, but fear only works on creatures that haven't learned to manage it. The shadow stalker's attacks became more erratic as its psychological tactics continued to fail. It tried lunging forward with its razor-sharp claws, but Ben sidestepped the attack with minimal effort, using the creature's own momentum to move himself into a better position. When it tried to use its phase-shifting abilities to appear behind him, Ben somehow anticipated the move and was already turning to face it when it materialized. The thing is, Ben continued, dodging another swipe of the creature's claws, humans have been dealing with predators for millions of years. We've learned that the best defense isn't running or hiding, it's making yourself scarier than whatever is trying to eat you. The Zalari guides watched in amazement as their most feared predator became increasingly desperate in its attacks. Fethsel lowered his weapon, unable to believe what he was seeing. Impossible, he whispered. The prey hunts the hunter. But Ben wasn't hunting the shadow stalker. He was doing something far more sophisticated. He was teaching it that humans were not prey animals despite their lack of natural weapons or armor. Every movement he made, every calm word he spoke, every time he anticipated and countered one of its attacks, he was reprogramming the creature's understanding of the natural order. The shadow stalker was beginning to understand that it had made a terrible mistake. This was not prey. This was something else entirely, something that its instincts recognized as a fellow predator, but couldn't categorize. The human scent was all wrong. Its behavior was incomprehensible, and worst of all, it showed no fear whatsoever. Here's the thing about being an apex predator, Ben said, still circling the increasingly confused creature. You're only apex until you meet something higher up the food chain. And where I come from, we've been at the top for a very long time. The shadow stalker made one more desperate attempt to assert its dominance, rearing up to its full height and letting out a sound that was part roar, part scream, and part psychic assault designed to paralyze prey with terror. The sound echoed through the forest, causing birds to fall silent and small creatures to flee in all directions. Ben stood. The shadow stalker had never taken a step backward from anything in its entire life. In the millions of years that its species had evolved on Thresh-Mole, they had always been the hunters, never the hunted. But now, faced with this strange creature that refused to show fear, it found itself experiencing an emotion that had no name in its primitive understanding: doubt. Dr. Ben Carter saw the change immediately. The creature's posture shifted from aggressive confidence to something approaching uncertainty. Its claws, which had been extended and ready to tear, slowly retracted. Its head lowered slightly, no longer held in the dominant position that apex predators use to intimidate their prey. "That's right," Ben said softly, still maintaining steady eye contact. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" "I'm not what you thought I was." The other members of the expedition watched in complete amazement. Fethsil and Nimtar, the Zalari guides, had their large eyes fixed on the scene before them, unable to process what they were seeing. In their culture's entire recorded history, no one had ever faced down a shadow stalker and lived to tell about it. The idea that someone could make one back down was beyond their understanding of how the universe worked. Sergeant Tony Martinez kept his weapon ready, but didn't fire. He had served with Ben Carter for 3 years and had learned to trust the older man's instincts even when they seemed completely crazy. If Ben said he knew what he was doing, then Tony would give him the chance to prove it. Dr. Rachel Kim was recording everything, her scientific training overriding her natural fear response. This was the kind of breakthrough that would revolutionize their understanding of predator behavior across the galaxy. She made sure her cameras captured every detail of the encounter. The shadow stalker circled Ben slowly, its form shifting between solid and translucent as it tried to find some way to regain the advantage. But every time it moved, Ben moved with it, maintaining the eye contact and body language that clearly established him as the dominant presence in the clearing. "You know what your real problem is?" Ben continued, his voice calm and educational, as if he were giving a lecture rather than facing down a creature that could kill him in seconds. "You've never learned to lose. Your entire species has been winning for so long that you've forgotten how to handle defeat." The creature made a sound that was part growl, part whine. It was a sound that no Zalari had ever heard from a shadow stalker before, because shadow stalkers had never before encountered anything that could make them feel vulnerable. Ben began to move closer to the creature, not aggressively, but with the confident stride of someone who belonged at the top of the food chain. Each step he took was deliberate and controlled, designed to reinforce his dominance without triggering a desperate attack. "The thing about humans," Ben explained to the confused predator, "is that we've been both predator and prey for our entire evolutionary history. We know how to hunt and we know how to avoid being hunted. But most importantly, we know how to fight when we have to." The shadow stalker's confusion was complete now. Everything about this situation went against its deepest instincts. Prey didn't advance on predators, prey didn't maintain eye contact. Prey didn't speak in calm, confident tones while walking straight toward certain death. But this creature was doing all of those things, and somehow making them work. "You're not actually a bad design," Ben continued, now close enough to reach out and touch the creature if he wanted to. "Stealth capabilities, phase shifting, psychic fear projection, razor-sharp natural weapons. On most worlds, you'd be absolutely unstoppable." The shadow stalker stood perfectly still, its alien mind struggling to process what was happening. The fear-inducing psychic abilities that had served its species for millions of years were having no effect on this strange being. Its natural weapons, while still dangerous, seemed somehow less threatening when faced with something that showed no fear of them. "But you see," Ben said, stopping just an arm's length from the massive predator, "humans didn't evolve on most worlds. We evolved on Earth, where everything is trying to kill everything else all the time. We learned to be more dangerous than the things that wanted to eat us. And then Ben Carter did something that would be remembered in Zalari history as the moment when their understanding of the universe fundamentally changed." He reached out slowly and placed his hand on the shadow stalker's head, right between its reflective black eyes. The creature could have killed him instantly. Its claws were still sharp, its speed was still overwhelming, and its phase-shifting abilities would have made it impossible for the humans to retaliate. But instead of attacking, the shadow stalker did something that no member of its species had ever done in recorded history. It submitted. The great predator lowered its head under Ben's touch, acknowledging with that simple gesture that it had encountered something higher in the natural hierarchy than itself. Its form solidified completely, abandoning the phase shifting that was its greatest advantage, making itself vulnerable as a sign of surrender. "Good," Ben said gently, his voice carrying the same tone he might use with a nervous horse or an aggressive dog. "You're learning. There's a place for everyone in the natural order, but it's not always where you think it is." The Zalari guides stood in shocked silence, their minds struggling to accept what they had witnessed. Nimtar, who had spent his entire life studying the movements of apex predators from a safe distance, felt his worldview cracking like thin ice. "How?" Bethsil whispered, his voice barely audible. "How is this possible?" Ben looked over at the young Zalari while keeping one hand on the Shadow Stalker's head. "Confidence," he said simply, "and the knowledge that fear is just another tool. You can use it, or you can let it use you." The Shadow Stalker remained still under Ben's touch for several more seconds, then slowly began to back away. Its movements were different now, no longer the flowing predatory grace it had displayed earlier. Instead, it moved with something approaching: respect, never turning its back on Ben as it retreated toward the edge of the clearing. Just before it disappeared into the shadows between the trees, the creature did something that none of the witnesses would ever forget. It looked back at Ben one last time and made a sound that was clearly a form of communication, not the threatening growl of a predator, but something more like recognition or acknowledgement. Then it was gone, vanishing into the forest as silently as it had appeared. The clearing fell silent except for the distant sounds of the alien forest. Ben stood where he was for a moment longer, then calmly walked back to his companions as if nothing unusual had happened. "Well," he said, checking his recording equipment, "that was educational. Did everyone get the data they needed?" Tony stared at him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Ben, do you realize what you just did? You made an apex predator back down without firing a shot." "Actually, I think it made itself back down," Ben replied thoughtfully. "I just gave it the option to do so with dignity." Rachel was reviewing the footage on her camera, her hands shaking slightly with excitement. "This is going to change everything. The entire galactic understanding of predator dynamics, the relationship between intelligence and physical dominance, the role of psychological warfare in species survival." But it was Nimtar who put the encounter into its proper perspective. The old Zalari tracker looked at Ben with something approaching reverence and said, "You have shown us that there are hunters beyond our hunters. The forest itself will remember this day." The journey back to the city was very different from their trip into the wild. Word of the encounter spread through the forest's ecosystem with supernatural speed, and the expedition found themselves traveling through a world that suddenly seemed less threatening. Other predators watched them from the shadows but kept their distance, as if some invisible message had been passed through the wildlife. When they reached the energy barriers around Thresh Holland, they found the entire Zalari population waiting for them. News of their encounter with the Shadow Stalker had somehow reached the city ahead of them, carried by methods that the humans didn't understand. Ambassador Kethvak stepped forward as the barriers lowered to admit them. His large eyes fixed on Ben with an expression that combined shock, respect, and something that might have been fear. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did you really face a Kethmori in single combat and emerge victorious?" "Not combat," Ben corrected. "Communication. We came to an understanding." "You made it submit?" Kethvak said, his voice filled with wonder. "A Shadow Stalker, the terror of our world for countless generations, acknowledged you as its superior." Ben looked around at the gathered crowd of Zalari, their alien faces showing emotions that were clearly recognizable despite their different features. They were looking at him the way early humans might have looked at someone who had tamed fire or invented the wheel. "I showed it that humans aren't prey," Ben said simply. "Sometimes that's all it takes." In the days that followed, the story of the human who had dominated a Shadow Stalker spread throughout Zalari society and beyond. Other alien species heard the tale and began to wonder about these newcomers who seemed to approach danger so differently from everyone else. The encounter changed more than just Cyan.